Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth year of the clown decade, the decade where things are going to get much worse before they get much better. And in this episode I'm going to tell you why Just Stop Oil are going to be more emboldened than ever, and why you are going to have to suffer through the world that they are going to protest for. So first things first, why do I think they're going to get emboldened? Well, because an awful lot of them aren't actually being jailed or punished for their crimes. Climate protesters spared from jail over track invasion at British Grand Prix. 6 Just Stop Oil activists given suspended sentences after causing risk of serious harm in Silverstone F1 track invasion. And you can see them there under the definition of invasion, which means they are somewhere where they are not supposed to be. Hence, Suella Braverman's description of the boat people being invaders is correct in the same way. Lewis McKechnie, Emily Brocklebank, and Bethany Moggy, why do they always have mental names? Who were among 5 Just Stop Oil campaigners who were dragged off the circuit at Silverstone as 2 Formula 1 cars passed close by, were given suspended jail sentences at Northampton Crown Court on Friday. Just ridiculous. Passing sentence, Mr Justice Garnham also handed 12-month community orders to fellow protesters David Baldwin, Alistair Gibson, and Joshua Smith, finally a normal name. Gibson and McKechnie, both 22, Moggy 40, Baldwin 47, Brocklebank 24, and 30-year-old Smith all claimed the protest, which started after a red flag was signalled to halt the race, had followed a meticulous safety plan. But they were found guilty of causing what prosecutors said was an immediate risk of serious harm by sitting in the face of fast-moving vehicles. Yes, and quite frankly, if they were hit by them, I think the amount of tears shed would have been very limited. And by the way, according to this article, McKechnie and Brocklebank were the 2 people who glued themselves to the Van Gogh painting. So they have both committed public nuisance crimes before. But if that wasn't enough, I don't know whether it's McKechnie or Brocklebank here, but whichever one it is, he also was the guy who cable tied himself right in the middle of a Liverpool game to the goalposts to protest Just Stop Oil. So yeah, pretty ridiculous that all he's getting is suspended sentences. And if that wasn't enough, 4 more climate activists convicted of causing public nuisance given no jail term. Men staged protest in City of London October 2021, which included 1 gluing head to road to block traffic. Matthew Tully, 44, Ben Taylor, 38, George Burrow, 68, and Anthony Hill, 72, staged a protest between Bishopsgate and Wormwood Street in the City of London on 25 October 2021. They were convicted of causing a public nuisance by a jury at Inner London Crown Court. Well, thank God the jury is sensible in this case, unlike in the Edward Colston case. All 4 represented themselves. Addressing Judge Silas Reed, Burrow said, "I have no plans to be involved in any further actions. I realise hundreds of people involved in climate activism will express support to me and feel outraged when we are unable to speak about what our motivations in our defence." Tully said, "The Earth's temperature will rise above 3 degrees, so it's gone beyond the 2 degrees they kept saying. We are already seeing some of the effects of climate change. In the lives of our children and grandchildren, we will see crop failure, mass migration, war and water crises. We already have mass migration. We think our normal daily activities are okay, but we are living in an imaginary world. Things are very much not okay." I mean, this is just them bleating their own megaphones. I'm going to ignore the rest of them. Sentencing the 4 activists, Reed said, "None of you have any remorse in any real sense. In fact, it seems to me that you wear it with some pride. You each in your own way feel that the democratic process has failed. You set yourself above the law as if it were entitled to decide what the whole country does. I'm sure that you disrupted thousands of vehicles and many thousands of people. Your actions would have cost people time, money, or potentially a lot worse." The judge acknowledged their strongly held beliefs. "You each care passionately about the situation in relation to the world climate." Who cares? That should give them punishment more, if anything. Burrow was given a 3-week prison sentence, suspended for 18 months. He will have to complete 60 hours of unpaid work and pay £500 in prosecution costs. I mean, at the very least, at least that's happening. At least there is some punishment, but why give them suspended sentences anyway? Why not just put them in jail plus all that? Ugh. Tully was given a 6-week custodial sentence, suspended for 18 months. He will have to pay £3,500 in costs and will have to complete 100 hours of unpaid work. Taylor was also given a 6 weeks custodial sentence, suspended for up to 18 months. He will have to complete 100 hours of unpaid work and he will have to pay £3,500 in costs, but was given a conditional discharge. So in terms of punishment, I suppose it's not too bad with the suspended sentences, because at least they have to do hundreds of hours of community work and also have to pay thousands, in some cases, of pounds in prosecution costs. But seriously, for repeat offenders, they should absolutely be put in jail, and at least we do have evidence of a ringleader being put in jail. As you can see in a previous video I've done, linked down in the description, Roger Hallam, pictured on screen, was put into jail for a month for conspiracy to cause a public nuisance. Roger Hallam, whose most recent favourite clip of mine, is one where he says this.
So what will happen is episodes where someone, a gang of young men, come into your house, they take your girlfriend, they take your mother, they put her onto the table and they gang rape her in front of you. And then after that, they take a hot stick and they poke out your eyes and they blind you.
Yes, his arguments have been so bad recently that he has to basically say, due to climate collapse, there are going to be gang rapists raping your sisters and your mums, and then they're going to poke your eyes out. But anyway, while he was in jail for a month, he decided to write to his blog one of the most cringe things I've ever read, so I'm going to read some of it out for you. English Gulag, a delayed Christmas message from Roger Hallam, written on the 12th of January of this year. About 9 weeks ago, I did a 20-minute speech on the crisis, just like the 100-plus public talks I've done over the past year. Destroying sovereign states, creating billions of refugees, shitting on our children's inheritance, and wiping out what's left of the natural world justifies concrete acts of civil disobedience. Obviously. Scarlett Howells from the Sun newspaper made a recording. She gave it to the police and made a deal. The Sun would get to film my arrest when the police came into my flat. I was not there when it happened. They took my laptop and other stuff, like they do every few months. They changed the locks and left a note for me to come to the police station. They arrested me 36 hours in a police cell. The interview by the police involved 200 questions. 200 times I said no comment. Not one question on me talking about James Hansen, ex-head of NASA, and his colleagues' latest memo confirming the world would pass 1.5 degrees in 2024. I'd love to see if that's another prediction that doesn't come true. Not one question on me saying the worst episode of suffering and injustice in human history more than justifies non-violent disruption under English common law. Right of necessity. Some evidence cannot be collected. Police procedure has become politicised. You might call it that. Well, police procedure certainly is politicised, and it's very much in your favour. I'm amazed it took that many years before you found the inside of a jail cell, to be quite honest. And a lot of the rest of this blog post is just absolute nonsense. I mean, Roger Hallam is known to be a liar, and he's talking about his prison cell feeling like 90-degree heat, having a Romanian cellmate, and then having no water for 2 days before the police actually move them. And the only reason I believe this is because this blog post turns into some sort of weird poetry. I mean, listen to this. My next cellmate is a drug addict. 3 times a day, the smell of burning paper smoking out the cell. It's spice, and he's told me the deal. It gets up my nose. I'm watching England play, and in 5 minutes I'm on my back in the bed. I can't move my body. I can see, but I can't process what I'm seeing. For the next 3 hours, I'm thinking, am I going to die? If I do, then no one's going to come. If you press the emergency button, it's an hour before it's answered. Emergency here means emergency as in climate emergency as declared by the British Parliament 3 years ago. Some things are connected. I just don't believe this story. I think he's just making this up and trying to be poetically charming, but in the same way that George Lucas is. My cellmate breathes so heavily that I cannot think. When he coughs, it's like he's going to die. I tell the prison officer he's going to die. He says he'll sort it out, as they do. Later that day, the prison officer sticks his head around the door. You alright? That's it. On telly, it's about Chris Cabba, shot dead by the police. It's June 2023 before they find out what happened. I assume he's making a prediction there. Years before they get any justice. Black lives, right? You alright, Chris? A week later, my cellmate finally gets moved. I mean, he's just talking absolute nonsense, and the whole Chris Cabba thing, totally justified shooting. He was in a car that was connected to organised crime. He didn't stop for the police. What are the police going to assume when a car that is involved in violent organised crime is running away from the police? If this blog post wasn't crazy enough, by the way, he has actually been recording a 11-part podcast with each part easily going over an hour each from his prison cells, and it's called Designing the Revolution. And here's his introductory podcast of a minute long.
It's Roger Hallam here, telling you about my new podcast series, Designing the Revolution. These podcasts are recorded from prison. The UN says 1.5 degrees is no longer credible, so it's official. We're facing the biggest shit show in history.
I mean, Roger Hallam's been saying that for years anyway. He's saying that we are already past the point of no return. And even then, the 1.5 degrees was the preferable one. It's when it goes over 2 degrees where it becomes a massive issue, according to the climate cultists, with feedback loops making things worse and all that. But we're constantly dropping our carbon dioxide emissions, so I really don't know what he wants us to do. Because if you get rid of them all at once, people starve.
The revolution is now inevitable. Everything's going to change because it's got to change. So how are we going to plan a revolution to create democracy in the 21st century, rather than fascism?
The implication here that we are under fascism is incredible. The green blob has well and truly wedged itself into Westminster politics. Rishi Sunak's been up there during Prime Minister's questions trying to impress the one Green Party member that Parliament has. And she even smiled and clapped at the fact that he was saying, yes, we are going to have a lot more renewables and cut away the gas and oil we rely on when the wind isn't blowing, but whatever.
Listen to me. I've had 35 years' experience of creating social change. I initiated and helped run the biggest climate campaigns of the last decade.
Yeah, so I find it pretty amazing that you're only in jail for a month.
This podcast series is going to be the most important series you're ever going to listen to, because it's now or never. So get your notepad, tell your friends, get organised, save humanity, without all the bullshit, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, thank God he didn't call the podcast series My Struggle. But yes, as has always happened and always seems to be okay to a lot of people's minds, Roger Hallam has made a lot of revolutionary handbooks. I've done a video covering his handbook, which a lot of other people wrote in, about how to be a good Extinction Rebellion activist. And it has pages and pages upon how to be civilly disobedient, how to block bridges, how to block roads, what you should do to cause a public nuisance, and also it encourages it. I don't understand why that book, it doesn't need to be banned obviously, but I don't understand why everyone who has signed their name off to be in that book hasn't been arrested and investigated. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Even Caroline Lucas, the one Green MP that Parliament has, had written in that handbook. Her name is right next to pages encouraging people to break the law. In fact, her pages might also encourage that too. Anyway, who remembers this girl?
Security?
What is worth more, art or life?
Yes, this pink-haired maniac is now the new spokesperson, as it seems, for Just Stop Oil. I think the last one they had turned out to be too stupid to be put on TV again.
Governments weren't going to open coal mines and take us back to the dark ages. I mean, honestly, we'll have children up the chimneys by Christmas, will we? Next week, will Prime Minister's Question Time be in VHS? We're not world leaders.
Yes, let's see if this pink-haired maniac's any better. Here she is being asked by Jacob Rees-Mogg how the climate activists can possibly hope to give people more comfortable lives like they want, but also to stop all emissions immediately.
And I wonder why you think it's incompatible to help people with the cost of living crisis and to switch to renewables, which are 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels.
It's just a ridiculous thing to say. If that was true, then wind and solar farms would be completely undercutting the profits and the customer base from energy providers that use gas and oil. But they're not. And the reason is because it is so cheap, but that's only when it's running. The rest of the time they have to rely on coal, well, not so much coal in the UK, but oil and gas, to make up for the times when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing.
Can you name me one of your viewers who is suffering the consequences of the cost of living crisis, who doesn't want their energy bills to be 9 times cheaper right now?
Honestly, renewables being cheaper is one of the worst ways in which statistics has been manipulated to make it seem cheaper than it is. Again, it is worth having, but only in windy places and sunny places, which some of Britain is. But the prices go massively up when you need oil and gas reserves. And hey, according to government plans, they are trying to get more solar farms and wind farms in the UK, especially onshore wind, which for some reason is very popular. Anyway, Mogg makes the same points that I do, and then she replies with this.
Well, why aren't we implementing renewable technology? The largest solar farm in the UK was built in 6 weeks.
But it's not
It takes up to 28 years for any oil to come out of the ground in the North Sea.
Yes, but again, they're only useful when the sun is shining. Also, the 28-year thing, yeah, that is true. The thing is that, well, you've got 40 years maybe of reserves under the North Sea where we already know it is. And to be honest, it's probably going to be slightly quicker because we actually know where all the oil is. It's just exploring to find the right places to extract the oil is the problem and can take up to 28 years. But as Jacob Rees-Mogg is just about to say again, the issue is that the reason that these renewables are so cheap is because they're entirely reliant on these non-renewable energy sources, which is probably why it's actually a better idea, instead of searching for more oil and gas, though, to be honest. If companies want to search for it, go ahead, give them the licenses, but it's probably a better idea to actually encourage investment into nuclear and build nuclear power plants.
We already have the capacity to provide so much of our energy from renewables without any technology needed for storage solutions.
Now, there's a website called grid.imk.com that actually gives you live information about the national grid and where all the energy sources are coming from. And this is quite a typical day when it comes to energy sources in the UK. And as you can see, 36.5% come from renewables, 17.2% come from semi-renewables, which nuclear, it lasts so long it may as well be renewable, and biomass, well, you need a lot of farmland to actually burn the biomass, but as you can see, a lot does not come from fossil fuels, and these fossil fuels are probably having to be spent because while I look outside it is quite sunny here at the moment. That's not necessarily true for the rest of the UK, but it doesn't look particularly windy. And as you can see, wind is quite low on this graph, and solar, that's making up most of the renewables, a whole 23% of our current energy production. And if it was very cloudy and just as windy as it is today, you'd probably have to see that gas is making up that shortfall. This is a very good case study as to, yes, when the sun shines and the wind blows, we do pretty good. Doesn't happen all the time, though. And that's what we need the non-renewables for at the moment, because we haven't built enough nuclear power plants yet. So anyway, Mogg then asks her what she's going to do in the short term getting rid of all these fossil fuels.
Quite frankly, I'm not a scientist.
Oh, you didn't need to tell us that. Trust me, that was pretty obvious.
What I am doing is listening to what all the experts are saying. We're living in this insane world where the experts aren't being listened to. The United Nations has called for no more oil and gas. The International Energy Agency has said we can have no new oil and gas. The IPCC report, the largest global report on the climate crisis, have all said we can have no new oil and gas. How many more experts need to say it?
And once again, the pink-haired maniac is completely ignoring the question. Yes, there are a lot of intergovernmental panels and lots of global agencies saying no new oil and gas should be looked into, but again, she's not saying what the solution is. All she's saying is, look, all of these people and experts are saying there's a problem. Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't even disagree there's a problem here, and this is where the climate cultists are just mental, because everyone agrees that climate change is a problem. It's just the adults in the room don't think it is going to be the end of the world. Most people listen to the expert Bjorn Lomborg, but I am sure that this pink-haired maniac has never heard of him and would call him a climate denier. And his solutions are very comprehensive, and a lot aren't even related directly to renewable and non-renewable energy sources. A lot of them is basically just a load of charity work to the third world, like make sure they're all fed properly because that will increase their IQs, and then make them more productive in their own countries, where then they can help build better infrastructure and hopefully then as well move away from reliance on non-renewables. But they're probably going to need that for now because they don't want to starve. Anyway, Rees-Mogg has to once again push the question, how are we supposed to do this overnight then?
Quite frankly, I'm not a scientist.
Then why have you come on to talk about this? It's the hubris of this entire episode that is getting to me. She knows she doesn't know anything, that's why she's having to go straight to emotional arguments. But then Rees-Mogg's just being very calm and saying, okay, what are the solutions then? Can you please let me know? And she's just saying, well, don't ask me. Well, why are you raising the alarm if you don't understand anything then?
What I'm doing is I'm looking at the world, and we're living the effects of the climate crisis today. Right now, people are dying. Children are starving. Families are fleeing their homes.
If she brings up the Pakistani floods, I'm actually going to flip a lid. The reason Pakistan flooded is because midway through the last century, when it became a country, it had 35% forest coverage. That is now just down to 4 or 5%. And having a lot less forest coverage means that water just goes straight to urban areas, it has a lot of downflow, and then it floods rivers, to the extent which you saw in Pakistan. Ironically, if they had oil and gas heaters in their homes instead of having to burn wood, which they needed to chop down the trees for, they probably actually wouldn't have had that problem. So, emitting carbon emissions, which wood does anyway, but from fossil fuels instead of the local forests, probably would have meant no flood in Pakistan. Anyway, Reesblog once again has to press the point that thanks to fossil fuels and to other industrial action making everything cheaper, people's life expectancies have massively increased, but he brought up fertilisers and food, and this was her big brain response. Anyway, after a few more minutes of her blustering on about emotional arguments and the experts and things like that, Reesmog just keeps having to make the point that it's fossil fuels that's the reason that so many people are living so long these days, and then she has to come out with a personal attack.
Jacob, you have 6 children. Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war.
Just so you're all very aware, this is the TV-friendly version of this.
A gang of young men come into your house, they take your girlfriend, they take your mother, they put her onto the table and they gang rape her.
Yeah, she's just having to go right down to very emotional arguments because she quite clearly doesn't have any scientific ones, because as she keeps reminding us, she's not a scientist. But anyway, I think you get the idea of that interview. If you want to see the rest of it, link down in the description as usual. But that's not the only place where the new Just Stop Oil spokesperson has appeared. The BBC also invites her on to Politics Live. I think we should take a look at that. So a Tory MP makes the point that the Conservatives have been very good when it comes to the climate debate in terms of their policies and their results, and to be honest, our CO2 emissions have been going down, and they are doing such a ridiculous amount, as I said before, to make Caroline Lucas happy. It would be ridiculous to say that they do not have a good record. So this is what Pink-Haired Maniac had to say.
And I think it's clear that we are not leaders in energy policy. We are going back to the dark ages with our energy.
Going back to the dark ages in our energy policy by having more onshore wind farm and solar farms. And yes, allowing for some exploratory licences for oil and gas firms, yes.
Opening up a new coal mine, the government is looking to approve the Rosebank oil field. Continuing to drill for new oil and gas is an act of genocide, and the government knows it.
It is an act of genocide from the government to make energy cheaper, therefore allowing people to get out of the cost of living crisis quicker. Not entirely sure I buy that, to be honest. So in reply to that, the Tory MP basically says, well, no, we're clearly world leading, here are some stats, and then it moves on to the Labour MP, and the Labour MP basically says, yes, there needs to be a balance struck. We do need to move away slowly from oil and gas, but it's going to take time, and there's some good economic opportunities in terms of renewables. And no one seems to talk about nuclear, which annoys me, but oh well. But the conversation is then brought back to Pink-Haired Maniac, and this is what she has to say when she's asked, do you think there's a difference between the approach between the Tories and Labour?
Can I come back to why I said it's an act of genocide? Because you were talking about economics, you were talking about job opportunities, and I think you're really missing the point.
I love it. It's just this ridiculous assumption that people aren't going to have lives ever if you add 1 more tonne of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. No one's even talking about how reforestation in Europe and the UK is going on, but that seems to be a point that is completely absent from talks like this, and that annoys me as well. But let's see what she has to say about genocide.
And that is that people are dying as a direct result of the climate crisis. And every day that emissions rise, and they will continue to rise whilst we keep licensing new fossil fuels, more people will die. There is blood on the hands of the Tory party, and they know it.
All right.
Even the host of Politics Live is realising that, oh, this woman is just mental. You know, I've cut the clips out, but the rest of that panel is just having a very standard, average, adult conversation about fossil fuels and about renewables. But then it's just the Pink-Haired Maniac comes in and plays pigeon chess and accuses everyone on the panel of being part of the genocide, as if there's some SS officer in Auschwitz. It's no wonder that people have found her hilarious since she was making these quite frankly ridiculous claims. And when sensible points are being made to her about you can't just turn off fossil fuels overnight, she pulls a face like a stroppy teenager.
The Committee of Climate Change have just released a report today talking about the importance of adaptation. The UK alone cannot change the global temperature. That cannot happen.
She's literally acting like her mum has just taken a mobile phone off her on the dining room table. It's just ridiculous. Opinionated Zoomers are the absolute worst type of people. Apart from me, I'm the best opinionated Zoomer. Anyway, after all that, there's quite a long section of adult conversation and the point that any new oil and gas exploration should have a condition that it is adapting to net zero policies should come along with it, and pink-haired maniac is asked what she thinks of that.
Any new licensing of new oil and gas is not a commitment to net zero.
Well, it can be if they also pay for the carbon capture storage of emissions, and that's perfectly reasonably possible. The only issue at the moment is that it's very expensive, but like everything, it becomes cheaper over time, especially if you're putting hundreds of thousands of tons of it into already extracted wells. Hell, it was a policy that the Green Party were pushing until recently, because as it turns out, the Green Party just want everything to be socialist. They don't really care about the environment.
And I'd like to come back to what you said about adaptation, because I don't understand how you plan to adapt to climate breakdown. There were hundreds of lawyers that signed a letter to say that we will see the breakdown of law and order at 1.5 degrees of warming.
Yes, and there are also 100 lawyers who said that they will not prosecute climate change activists who have been put into court. The thing is, it turned out that most of those lawyers weren't even criminal prosecutors anyway, so it was a completely pointless gesture. And lawyers aren't soothsayers, they can't predict everything, and I don't think it's reasonable to say that 2 degrees warmer in Great Britain will mean that there is a complete breakdown of law and order. I don't even think it will make us as warm as the south of France, and there's law and order there, allegedly.
Which we're locked in for. When we get to 2 degrees of warming, they predict that we see 1 billion climate refugees. Just before I came on, I heard that you were talking about the refugee crisis. How do you plan to adapt to 1 billion climate refugees?
Phoebe,
why aren't we implementing the scientific solutions that we have? Why aren't we switching to renewables, which are 9 times cheaper? Why aren't we insulating British homes?
Well,
why aren't we subsidising public transport?
Let them answer your questions.
Why aren't we taxing big polluters and billionaires? These are no-brainer solutions.
All right.
I thought I'd just let that bit play out. As I say, it's pigeon chess. Yes, you've made your point. Yes, you don't need to go through all those silly points, though we can go through them one by one if you really want. I already did with Jacob Rees-Mogg. But this is what I mean, it's just emotional arguments. Or the more things I say, the more it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, when, as we've gone through, everything she's just mentioned is actually not really a solution, and every time she is asked for solutions, well, here it is, it's just thousands of them. Oh, those don't really work. Can you give us a more concrete answer? No, I'm not a scientist. It's just pigeon chess. That's all she's doing. A board has been put in front of her for this debate, and she is just flapping her wings and making sure all the pieces fall. Anyway, I think that's about as much as I will cover of her. If you want to see her going off her absolute gourd anymore, the link is down in the description as usual. And I think we will be seeing more of her on our televisions and on podcasts and things like that. She might end up on Novara Media soon. They only just interviewed Roger Hallam after he got out of jail. And this is the thing, for some reason, the points she's actually brought up, which, as we have gone through, are completely silly, are all points of contention and all points that have been brought up in Parliament. We are letting these idiots dictate climate policy to us. And the best we can get is backbenchers like Jacob Rees-Mogg coming forward and saying, well, hang on, this is a bit silly. And yet it's not enough. It keeps being pushed through. Sunak keeps trying to appease these people, and he absolutely shouldn't. He should just ignore them. Move slowly away from fossil fuels, because one day we're going to run out, and that's just sensible policy. And yes, maybe move towards some renewables where people want them. Move towards nuclear, because everyone likes cheap energy, and nuclear is a pretty good option for that. And if enough people are worried about carbon emissions, then fine, have a tax on the people who worry about that and put it towards carbon capture storage. That is completely reasonable. Yet wanting to stop oil and gas production in the UK overnight, not going to work. Not wanting any more exploration to possibly even sell the fossil fuels to other countries, not sensible. So really these people should be ignored, but they're not being ignored, and that's why I have to make videos like this to show people that they are actually nuts. They're very good at doing it themselves, but the whole point of that is, if they're being nuts, Don't take them seriously when you're considering policy. At the moment, everyone knows they're nuts, and yet they're still taken seriously with policy. And also jail everyone involved with Just Stop Oil. It is a group that actively encourages its members to break laws and get themselves in jail. So why not just take out the middleman? Why not just give them all a fine for being part of it, or give them community service, or jail them? They're clearly willing to commit crimes. They should be punished justly for that. Anyway, we've hit the half-hour mark, and that's everything I have for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.